started tweeting about it before it even posted online, and is still at it. In a flurry of tweets this morning, the president writing, quote, "The appointment of the special counsel is totally unconstitutional. Despite that, we play the game because I, unlike the Democrats, have done nothing wrong." One presidential advisor telling me that trash-talking Mueller is likely not a prelude to firing Robert Mueller. The reason, according to this advisor, he said, quote, "The president has a sense of when he's at risk, and he knows that he's at risk if he fires Mueller." But the president also tweeted about pardons today, writing, quote, "As has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon myself. But why would I do that when I've done nothing wrong?" In the meantime, the never-ending witch hunt led by 13 very angry and conflicted Democrats and others continues into the midterms. Not so fast, Mr. President. Your pals don't think pardoning yourself would end well.
The President of the United States pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment.
Listen, there's no way that'll happen, and the reason it won't is because it then becomes a political problem, George. If the president were to pardon himself, he'll get impeached.
Joining us now, one of the reporters with the byline on that tremendous New York Times story that put all of this in motion, Matt Apuzzo, as well as Matt Miller, former chief spokesman for the Justice Department, Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney, now a law professor at the University of Alabama, and with us at the table, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI assistant director for counterintelligence, all of them, lucky for us, MSNBC analyst. Matt Apuzzo, let me start with you. Take us through this memo and how this has essentially changed the debate from one where nobody went on TV this weekend and said the president didn't obstruct justice. They were making a very different case in their public comments, basically making this legal argument that he can't obstruct justice because he's the president and he has the right to terminate any investigation he wants.
Yeah, and many of the arguments in this memo we've heard varieties of, variations on in public over the past year. But this was really an effort by the president's lawyers to sort of chalk outline a very, very broad boundary on presidential authority. In a nutshell, the argument is the president can do absolutely anything when it comes to an investigation, even if it's an investigation into him, because he is the ultimate. He has the ultimate power in the executive branch. He oversees the Justice Department. So he can do absolutely anything he wants, and it won't be obstruction of justice. It's remarkable, it's novel, and this idea that the president cannot possibly commit obstruction is one that I think we're going to be talking about a lot.
Let me read a little bit more from the piece, Matt, and get you to give us some more context. So you guys report that Mr. Trump's broad interpretation of executive authority is novel and is likely to be tested if a court battle ensues over whether he could be ordered to answer questions. It's unclear how that fight, should the case reach that point, it's unclear how it would play out. The attempt to dissuade Mr. Mueller from seeking a grand jury subpoena is one of two fronts on which Mr. Trump's lawyers are fighting. In recent weeks, they have also begun a public relations campaign to discredit the investigation, and in part to preempt a potentially damaging special counsel report that could prompt impeachment proceedings. So it seems like this leaked at a moment when the stakes couldn't be higher for the president and his legal team. Do you have any insight into whether a subpoena for an interview is imminent?
I don't have that insight. What's interesting here is that this is a glimpse into the negotiations at the moment that they're sort of reaching their climax, right? Will the president be interviewed or won't he be interviewed? We're seeing the back and forth. This is a document, the likes of which we don't often get to see. Presidents usually have their lawyers try to write these sorts of memos, privately and confidentially, because they don't want to put down the marker and say, this is where I think the boundaries of presidential authority are. And that sort of murkiness has benefited presidents of both parties, since the beginning of the republic. We all, whether there's an investigation or whether it's Congress, it always works out best if everybody just kind of works it out, and we don't have to test the elasticity of the Constitution.
So, Matt Apuzzo, I want you to put this in the timeline for us, because you and your colleagues reported on the questions that Robert Mueller's investigators gave Jay Sekulow, one of the president's lawyers. That happened after Robert Mueller received this 20-page memo that was received, that you guys obtained. But before this memo was crafted, there was the memo itself from John Dowd and Jay Sekulow does seek to respond to areas of interest to Robert Mueller. Can you take us through where this memo fits into the timeline and how we better understand the timeline of the obstruction investigation because of it?
Sure. So remember, at the end of last year, the president was saying publicly, I would love to meet with Bob Mueller. Can't wait to do it. Should be done in a matter of weeks. And then this thing will be over. Privately, behind the scenes, the lawyers are basically saying you've got no business asking to sit with the president. And one of the arguments is, we've given you so much. We've given you 20,000 pages of documents, and we've made everybody in the West Wing available to be interviewed. You have everything you need. The president cannot be compelled to sit, and certainly shouldn't even have to voluntarily sit. And I think this is important because what it's doing is it's basically a warning shot for Mueller. It's preemptively emptying the cannons and saying, here's what you're going to face if you actually go through with a subpoena. Here's what's going to happen if we go to court. You don't want that fight. Let's try to work something out. So
when you said a warning shot to Mueller, Frank Figliuzzi burst out laughing. So we're going to go to you.
There are no warning shots in the FBI. It's against FBI policy to fire warning shots. And I mean that. So,
and it's I'm guessing you surmise that Robert Mueller isn't really moved by a warning shot.
Look, I've lost count of the number of times in my career working with Bob Mueller where he's actually told DOJ in writing that he objects to their decision making, he doesn't agree with their policy, and he puts it in writing and he signs it. That's who we're dealing with here. He's not someone who's going to acquiesce to a theory that the president can't be charged with any crime or can't be brought before a grand jury. And if anything, Nicole, this has actually energized him to do just that.
So two of his peers who worked alongside Robert Mueller in the long years after 9/11 have said exactly this. They said that what the media gets wrong about Robert Mueller is that if he's decided whether or not he can indict the president, he wouldn't tell a dying relative. If he's decided whether or not to subpoena Donald Trump, he wouldn't tell anybody. Nobody knows what Robert Mueller is going to do except Robert Mueller. So what does this tell us about the degree of fear that Trump's legal team has? I've heard that what scares them the most is Mueller's silence.
Look, I've spent my career looking for indicia of guilt in people and studying behavior, and I have to tell you that what we're seeing are the actions of a guilty party. A guilty party saying, I didn't do that, but if I did, then it
Here's how I'd argue in court.
Illegal, and I should have done it anyway because I can do whatever I want. Over time, what we're seeing is not somebody exercising their legal rights. We're seeing indicia of guilt. This is what guilty people say and what guilty people do.
All right, you got all the lawyers nodding. Joyce Vance, let me play you former CIA Director John Brennan making a similar point this morning. We'll talk about it on the other side.
His tweets are not the tweets of an innocent individual. So I think it really demonstrates just how desperate he is getting, grasping at straws, and Rudy Giuliani as well. Neither Rudy nor his boss feel encumbered by facts, truth, or common sense. And so I think that's why they're throwing these things out now to try to get whatever traction among their base as possible.
Joyce, we're going to go through all of what is revealed on the flashpoints of obstruction of justice that we understand to be under investigation by Robert Mueller, the crafting of the statement aboard Air Force One, the firing of Jim Comey. But I want you just to address the broader topic of the conduct of a guilty person.
The most surprising thing that we saw in this letter that the president's team wrote on his behalf is a really weak effort to argue that he's not guilty. Most of their arguments are process arguments, saying that the president can't be subpoenaed, can't be indicted, can't be investigated, shouldn't be impeached. We didn't really see a strong core argument saying he's not guilty in the first place, so let's put an end to this. And that, I think, is what was the most surprising aspect of this letter to people who looked at it. The very weak defense on substantive grounds, very little effort to say, I'm not a crook.
And this is the distinction, Matt Miller, that the president's allies make, that he is probably innocent on collusion because he was too incompetent to work that out and nail it down with Vlad. But on obstruction, whoa. And sitting down in an interview, no way. This guy is full of hyperbole. I think Chris Christie has said that in interviews. He's a salesman. And I think Rudy Giuliani, when confronted with some of the lies that are caught and what the New York Times has reported, said, hey, yeah, no objection from me. That's why he can never sit for an interview. What do you say, and where are we, that everyone, even the people defending the president, are essentially calling him a liar who likely obstructed justice?
I think they're realizing that they're only really left with basically the Nixon argument, which is the argument you saw made in this memo. It essentially boils down to, if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. And I think they're making that argument because they know that at this point in the investigation, Mueller has collected a tremendous amount of evidence. They're not going to be able to say that Trump didn't take the actions that he knows he took. They're not, they will dispute somewhat that he said what he said to Comey, but no one believes the president in a decision whether he or Jim Comey is telling the truth. I doubt they're going to be able to dispute in any real way his motive when they get down to the end of it, because they're going to have all of these people who he complained to about Comey, all these people who he complained to about Jeff Sessions, his public comments to Lester Holt about why he was firing Comey, plenty of evidence of motive. So what you're left is this very legal argument that if the president does it, it can't be illegal. And I think the thing that was really striking about this memo, it wasn't just a retrospective argument, it was a prospective argument. It's not just illegal, it just can't be illegal that the president fired Jim Comey, took an action as president, but that if he moves forward, if he terminates this investigation by either firing Bob Mueller or reaching in the Justice Department and ordering it be halted, or exercising his pardon authority to pardon people who are close to him, that can't be obstruction of justice either. They're really kind of retreating to the most narrow argument they can make to defend the president.
Matt Apuzzo, I want to drill down on some of the substance, because one of the people having a bad day because of what you and your colleagues have reported is Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's caught in another lie. I'm not sure if that makes her uncomfortable anymore or not, but let's watch Sarah at today's briefing getting pushed by a Washington Post reporter about that Air Force One statement.
If you're saying one thing from the podium, that it wasn't dictated by the president, and his lawyers are saying something entirely different, contradicting you, how are we supposed to know what to believe? How can we believe what you're saying from the podium if his lawyers are saying it's entirely inaccurate?
Once again, I can't comment on a letter from the president's outside counsel. I direct you to them to answer it. John?
But Sarah, the words are literally, you said he did not dictate. The lawyer said he did. What is it?
I'm not going to respond to a letter from the president's outside counsel. We purposely walled off, and I would refer you to them for comment.
So, Matt Apuzzo, give us a little bit of the backstory here, and then let's stay on this, because Don Jr. has also been caught lying in his testimony, because he was also asked about the crafting of that statement. But give us a little bit of the backstory on what Sarah was being pressed on and why. Well,
so obviously, back last July, as my colleagues and I were kind of putting the finishing touches on the story that revealed that this Trump Tower meeting had happened, we, of course, went to the White House. We went to Donald Trump Jr. We went to everybody and asked for statements. And we got a comment from Donald Trump Jr. through his lawyer that said, this was a basically nothing meeting. It was mostly about Russian adoption policy, basically pay it no mind. And then, of course, we found out a couple days later and reported that the president had personally signed off on this. Everybody at the White House and the legal team kind of went ballistic at that. And then the Washington Post came back over.
Mark Corallo quit over this. Mark Corallo was the president's kind of PR guy on the legal team. He quit over this. He